an original.
From Story Studio Network.
There we go. It is the 16th day of November. We're in the back half of the month already. Wow. It's a Thursday. I just can't seem to get that frog out of my throat this week. I don't know. Yeah, been one of them. Welcome in. It's Now and Next. Dave Trafford here for Story Studio Network. And had a good chat yesterday with Neil Hetherington. Neil is the CEO at Daily Bread Food Bank, the largest food bank here in Canada. And their latest numbers indicate that 1 in 10 Torontonians, that's just Toronto proper, used a food bank last year. 1 in 10. And if you listen to the conversation, Neil said that number's probably underestimated in terms of folks who live with food insecurity. Because the people who didn't get to a food bank went to friends or family for food, or they went to, community meals, that kind of thing. So more than 10% of our population in Toronto proper is food insecure. They can't get through the week without some kind of support. Anyway, Neil's got a call to action in there. Check it out. And if you've got a thought on that, there's a link in the show notes. We're going to include it today in this show as well. We want to hear your thoughts, and we want to include your reaction in the show. So maybe you're struggling with food insecurity. You know somebody who is. Maybe you had a call with your MP, your MPP, your city councilor, your mayor. Curious to know what the reaction was. So check out the show notes. There'll be an opportunity there for you to click and leave us a message, and we'll play those back in upcoming shows. All right. Here we go. As promised, lots to talk about as far as stuff going on with U.S. politics. And I think we're actually going to get through this segment without really even getting to talking about Donald Trump. We're going to put Trump separately, and we'll have to put time aside separately to talk about that because there's just so much. But there's new developments. So who better to talk to? David Schultz is here. He is the professor of political science and constitutional law at Hamiline University. Has been a global traveler. You were teaching overseas in Europe, I guess, about a month ago?
I was in 5 different countries at 6 different schools. I was from Iceland, Italy, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Romania. So I guess maybe only rock groups travel more for world tours than I do.
There you go. Well, at some point, we'll want to kind of pick your brain on sort of that European view of what's going on in U.S. politics and certainly international politics. But I want to start with the meeting yesterday between, the Chinese-U.S. summit. And, as I was watching the aftermath, David, it shocked me a little bit that the biggest thing that seemed to come out of it was a conversation about fentanyl. And that's not to understate or underestimate the impact of fentanyl on our society. There are all kinds of overdoses and deaths attributed to fentanyl. But really, we've got the 2 leaders of the 2 largest economies in the world talking. There's some tension there, and it was admitted right off the top. But this was an important historic gathering, and that was the headline.
Yeah. It surprised me, too, when we think about just take 2 events, Ukraine and Israel-Hamas, or Israel-Gaza, 2 events where we've got essentially wars going on at this point. And you would think that there would have been a major chunk of it would have been about that, or about some kind of frameworks for, I don't know, hopefully for peace or something like that. But you're right. That wasn't there. The trade wars between the 2 countries didn't seem to be the major topic. It looks like what they did was to find the one topic that they could find some agreement on. And that's what they talked about, so that it could say we had a successful summit. Because probably right now, the gap between the 2 of them on everything else is probably so big. They didn't want to highlight that.
Well, and I think, the hard, commentary afterwards, trying to thread that needle, and vis-a-vis, as you say, the Ukraine, Middle East, and then off on the other side of the desk is Taiwan. So what's going on there? So to kind of upset any of that, where it's really tentative to begin with, I think was a diplomatic dance that they had to do. But better than anybody, they know exactly what's going to come out of that meeting before they go into the meeting, right? It's all showbiz. So, you got to wonder what the objective was going in, if in fact it was simply to come to an agreement on fentanyl.
Well, I think, that could be it, of course. I think there is also the sense in which both countries are, I think, fearful that they're hurling towards a conflict, and that you've got to do something to break the momentum. And they're not talking to one another. I mean, we really haven't had the United States at this level of a dialogue with the People's Republic of China. And I can't even think of how many years at this point. And so to me, I'm not sure if it's the equivalent of saying, starting over with a new first date or whatever the metaphor is. I'm trying to think of our analogy here is, but I think just getting them to talk to one another, I think was important. And I think they wanted to be able to come out of this saying, we talked, which is important, and we could find at least some small iota of agreement on something so that you can live for another day. You can talk at a future point. I think about this because I'm old enough to remember the original Nixon going to China, and I say that because we've come a long way since then, but in some sense we've backtracked, and it's almost like trying to make up for lost ground in terms of the relationship that China and the United States had. So I think they obviously knew what they were doing going in. They knew what the agreement was. And a lot of this was, I think, show. A lot of it was show for both of their populations.
Yeah. And that Nixon visit to China happened in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviets. So
right.
It almost has this Cold War feel. China, U.S., though, I mean, at this stage where we're grudgingly talking to each other, the Soviets and the Americans would talk to each other during the Cold War as well. But, a lot of sandpaper in those discussions.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I also just think in terms of how the world feels right now, with a lot of sort of Cold War-ish kind of feelings at this point. Again, just coming back from Europe, being in countries like Lithuania or Slovakia or Romania, right on the edge of where the conflict is going on there. There's this Cold War feeling again about friends versus foes, about proxy wars, and about basically the basic structure of the world at this point. And I think that's partly what's hiding behind the Xi Biden talks here is really sort of the future of a world order that's been in place since the 1940s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it'll be curious to see how this gets stick-handled over the coming months because, of course, we're heading into, the maw of the campaign, the presidential campaign. So I want you to treat me like I'm in grade 5 for a minute and explain to me the significance of the New Hampshire primary date and why Biden's name is not on the ballot.
Okay, so New Hampshire, or rather Iowa and New Hampshire, have historically been at the beginning for the presidential cycle for going back nearly 50 years. Iowa is no longer at the center for the Democrats for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they botched it 4 years ago in terms of vote counting and a whole bunch of things. But also the criticism is that Iowa and New Hampshire, especially for the Democrats, is not demographically representative of the United States. And it's true, they're not. They're incredibly white states, white Caucasian states. And Biden didn't do well back in New Hampshire a few years ago. He did really well in places like Nevada and then, of course, South Carolina. So both the prerogative of being the president of the United States and the leader of your party and the Democrats trying to reach out to their constituency said, we're not going to have New Hampshire be first anymore. We're going to have somebody else. But of course, New Hampshire still wants to be first. There is pride in that. And I'll say there is also a lot of money being first at this point. So originally, the Democrats, Democratic National Committee was not going to approve New Hampshire to be first. Because of that, Biden did not register or did not sign up to participate in that primary. Well, he now has a challenger named Dean Phillips, who's a member of Congress representing part of Minnesota. I actually personally know Dean Phillips, and he's decided that he wants to challenge the president of the United States. Joe Biden is off campaigning in New Hampshire. He's on the ballot. Joe Biden is not. So suddenly we've got this question, is New Hampshire important or not? It truly is a beauty, if I could use that phrase, it truly is if I could use that political expression, a beauty contest, that it has no real bearing, no real meaning right now. But on the other hand, if Dean Phillips, who's on the ballot, Joe Biden is not, although Biden's now trying to find ways of getting on the ballot, if Dean Phillips does really well there, really racks up some support there, this could have an impact on the Biden campaign.
Right.
I think of another Minnesotan in 1968. It was Eugene McCarthy. Eugene McCarthy, a Minnesota senator running as the anti-war candidate, who decided to challenge the incumbent president, Democrat Lyndon Johnson, in New Hampshire. And McCarthy got close to beating Johnson. And because of that, Johnson, a few days later, announced he wasn't running for re-election. There's a little bit of what deja vu history potentially going on here. And that's the dynamic going on right now, is that New Hampshire, which was not supposed to be important next year, now may look just as important as it always has been.
So New Hampshire is first because the state legislature has decided that this is when they're going to hold it, and their own, history, constitution, whatever it might be, says that they're going to have theirs. What is it? A week? We get results a week before anybody else, basically, in the primaries.
Correct. Yeah, their law actually says something to that effect, is that we will be the first primary in the country, no matter what.
Right. So Biden's not having his name on there sounds like a bit of, short-sightedness, petulance. I don't know what the right word is, right, but it seems like bad politics.
It is bad politics. It's basically trying to say, we're going to ignore you, even though you historically haven't been important. We are going to ignore you, put you on the back shelf, so to speak. And New Hampshire's not going down without a fight at this point. And it created this opportunity for somebody to challenge Biden at this point. Yeah, I think it was short-sighted. I understand the politics they were trying to play. I don't think it was smart politics, but I understand the politics they were trying to play by saying, okay, so I won't get on the ballot in New Hampshire because we don't think they should be first. Therefore, I can kind of ignore them. In politics, it's probably never smart to ignore people. Never smart to take people for granted. We used to have a Speaker of the House in the United States, Tip O'Neill, back in the 1980s. And I think the most important thing he ever said politically was to say, never take a vote for granted, never take people for granted, always ask for it. And I think this is an example here of basically ignoring or taking somebody for granted. And New Hampshire's not going to go down without a fight.
Well, and I said we weren't going to talk about Trump, but in fact, that's what happened. And you ended up with President Trump. I mean, effectively, he ran on this. You are all being ignored. I'm the only guy who can take care of you the first time around. And that resonated with people. So I think you're right they've got 1 foot left, the Democrats in New Hampshire, to shoot themselves in. But here's the curious thing for me is that, has there been a situation where an incumbent president has not been on a ballot and he's had to ask for a write-in option in a primary?
To the best of my knowledge, the answer is no. Or let me put it this way. I'll add one more to it. That's not been on the ballot, asked for a write-in, and has won. Right. Definitely the answer is no at this point. So this is going to be difficult, because Biden, again, didn't do well in New Hampshire 4 years ago. His ground game is not strong there to start with. Now, it may not be that Dean Phillips is very strong either. Most people in New Hampshire, when you say Dean Phillips, they say, who? They have no idea who he is. But still, this just makes Biden's prospects for reelection even more difficult. Because if we look at the numbers, he's not very popular in the United States. There's, in terms of overall approval rating of about 37, 38%. No incumbent president has ever won a second term with those numbers. Within his own party, the numbers are over 60% say don't run for a second term. He's got an issue. I've got to tell you a story. I think it's an absolutely great story here. Is that on the one hand, if you think about Biden, he's got numbers that some candidates would love to have. Was it last month? Almost a 5% GDP growth, record low unemployment, record high employment. He actually has a very consequential record as president in terms of legislation. But he's got one problem, his age and his image. Is that no matter what he does, even if he's in good health, I think the script has been written. People view him as too old. And here's the story. I was talking about this with my students a couple of weeks ago about Biden and his age. And this one student who she's going to get an A now. She's going to get an A in the class. She started off by saying, I have a grandfather who's about his age and he has good and bad days. And we all know what that means. We all know some like parents or grandparents, good and bad days. And then her next line was amazing. She said, we're probably only seeing Biden on his good days.
Yeah.
She said, I doubt the White House is bringing him out on the bad days. And as soon as she said that, I was like, wow, right. And I think, if not explicitly, I think the American public is thinking, if this is what he looks like on his good days, what's he like on his not so good days? And you know that phrase. I mean, your listeners know the same thing. Some other elderly friends, good and bad days.
Yeah, and we can get into the heady conversation about ageism and
right.
Qualification and meritocracy and all of that stuff, and that's all an important discussion. But yeah, and let's face it, you're back to your beauty show, beauty pageant part of this process as well. Let's face it, we're choosing leaders politically now based on charisma. Maybe age aside. I mean, so there's a whole bunch of elements that go into there, whether or not you're able to have great economic numbers or not.
Yeah.
That's not what's at the heart of people casting ballot or having confidence in what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, your student is expressing a question of confidence, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, there was a commercial on about 30 years ago. I think it was for Nikon cameras or something like that. And it featured Andre Agassi, and the whole slogan was "Image was everything," or "Image is everything." Yeah. And here, I think it's image. I mean, the media, the mainstream media, and mainstream media, and maybe the social media have written the script. The script is Biden looks old, and you're right. It may be sexism. It may be not sexism. It may be ageism. It may be a whole bunch of things that are unfair. But that's the script that's being told now, and I don't know how he breaks it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and back to Dean Phillips, he's saying that stuff to some degree. He's not quite saying he's too old, but he's not capable to move us forward. That we need a renewal. We need new blood. We need new thinking, and he's got a whole lot more fire and energy to make that case than certainly does Biden to defend himself from it. And at some point, the president's going to have to come out and address that. He's going to have to defend himself against these criticisms. I don't know why he would. I mean, to your point, his legacy could be, I've left the house in good order.
Yes.
Take care of it. Right?
Yeah. Most of us 4 years ago, when he announced he was running, thought he's running. If he wins, he's a one-term president. That we viewed him as the transition. That depending on your perspective, he defeats Donald Trump. He gets the nation back in the right order, moving in the right direction, whatever that is. And then I'll do an American Western. He rides off into the sunset. I don't think any of us expected him to be a two-term president. And suddenly, somewhere about a year and a half ago, it was he's going to run for a second term. It's like I don't think that was the bargain. I think the bargain was one term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's where you had that viewing as he's the best option to defeat Trump. That was that was the ballot question, right? I mean,
yes, it was.
It had nothing to do with platforms or politics. It was we got to save ourselves from Trump. The problem, if we play out this scenario as it is right now, and I know you've written extensively on it lately, election held today, and we'd be back to another mandate for Donald Trump. So his legacy then, Biden's, is he not only beat Trump, he lost to Trump.
That's right.
I mean, historically, he will just be, buried under that headline, and none of what he's done well is ever going to be, talked about or enlightened.
Yeah, his 4 years will be an asterisk of history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So internally in the Democratic Party, New Hampshire, to your point, wasn't supposed to be important. Now it's important. It opens up this possibility for more discussion, more debate, more fissure within that party. If I were betting, I'm going to say that Biden's not going to run for president. I'm just going to play the long odds here just to see what happens. Only because I like the nature of the story, and I have no horse, horse in this race. It's all up to you. But on the other hand, I guess maybe the last time we talked, the House of Representatives was all tangled up in a government shutdown option, and Kevin McCarthy managed to pull a rabbit out of his hat, and for that he got stabbed in the back by his own party. Now we've got another date coming up. It was tomorrow. Last night the Senate passed this legislation that puts everybody back on track for another 6 weeks or whatever,
8 weeks,
2 months.
Correct.
Yeah. So it just seems like hand to mouth again, but they've done it. But the new Speaker of the House achieved it by doing exactly what Kevin McCarthy did. And so you got to wonder, where the knives are in the Republican caucus to say, hey, we told you not to do that, and you went ahead and did it. Is there a guarantee that, he's going to survive the next 2 months?
It's a possibility that on our American Thanksgiving, which comes in about a week or so, both the turkey and Speaker Johnson get carved up because the rules that were in place that brought down Kevin McCarthy and the people that he basically won against are the same people Johnson won against.
Mm-hmm. So, and in Johnson's ability to kind of coalesce the party and get enough votes to become the speaker, would he have? I'm assuming he had to agree among the Republicans that one member could stand up and call for a vote of confidence in the speaker. He had to say that I'll abide by that if you make me speaker.
Yes, correct. He basically abided by the same rules that Kevin McCarthy did. And you're right. He's gone down so far the same path. He's carved a deal with the Democrats. In fact, I will say this both about Kevin McCarthy and Johnson. They did the right thing. They put country ahead of party, which I think is what we should do, saying that we're going to keep the government open. We're going to keep the doors going, keep the doors open. And that is the right answer. But McCarthy went down because of that. And it is entirely possible. I mean, that as we speak today on Thursday, the ink is not dry yet on the deal. I would not be surprised if we hear a call. Maybe it's Matt Gaetz. Maybe it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm not sure who it'll be. I would not be surprised if we hear before the weekend's out or soon a call for a vote on him.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't help him that the Democrats are all smiley and cheering and everything else about this bipartisan stuff. So,
that's right.
Happy to shake his hand, but know that somebody's going to stab him in the back. But again, even there, that's a completely dysfunctional way of governing. I mean, where the Democrats know that by doing this, that they put the legislative agenda on hold or possibility on hold. I mean, what did they go? How many days did they go without a speaker in the House?
There was several weeks. I think it was like about 2 to 3 weeks or something. The Democrats are playing long game now. The long game is that keep the dysfunction with the Republicans in the House and run against it in 2024 and say, we can do a better job than they can, oust the Republicans and put us in. And there's evidence from American public opinion that their strategy may be working.
Yeah.
We still have a year to go before the election, but think about how it might potentially help Joe Biden again. Joe Biden gets to run against not just Donald Trump, he gets to run against a dysfunctional Republican House of Representatives. Take the focus off of Biden and age, put it on the other side. That may be the strategy he's banking on.
Yeah, well, and then there's also the possibility where we have, a third party candidate in the middle of all that. The intrigue becomes pretty complicated when we look at what the variables might be in there. But I think to cap it all off, there was like one almost scrap in the hallways of the legislative buildings, and then there was a committee meeting where a witness was challenged to a fight. I mean, wow, what's going on? I mean, we love our hockey up here, but there's nothing like that going on.
I know. To me, I couldn't tell if this was a new version of NHL or WWF or something like that. Right? I mean, I see these pictures. You've probably seen them too, of across the world where like fights break out in like these, what we used to call like third world countries or something like that. And I don't mean to be demeaning like that, but I always want to say, we're a little bit better than that. We're a little bit more dignified. I'm not sure we are anymore at this point. And in fact, I suspect if we showed one of those fights on television, the ratings would be great.
Well, yeah. There seems to be not only a tolerance for it, like to your point, there's an appetite for
yes,
it. And
exactly.
We're back to that level of what's the confidence, what's the image, whose tribe do I belong to now, as opposed to talking about, great economic numbers, right?
Exactly. It brings us all right back to the China summit at this point. Who knows? Maybe the next summit will feature Xi and Biden in a tag team wrestling match.
Now you're talking Trump's language. That'd be good. David Schultz, always good to talk to you. Well, we will have you back, and we're going to have to kind of sort through the can of worms around the Trump legal issues. And then, it's getting more and more disturbing to hear what he's saying at some of his rallies. But I want to be able to devote some time to that. David Schultz is a professor at Hamiline University. Political science and constitutional law is his expertise. If you've got a thought or a comment on it, check the show notes, and we'd love to hear from you. Literally, leave the message, and we're going to play some of them in upcoming programs. That'll do it. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner, and our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.